I'm just going to get a reading on this. This is an interview with George Forrest conducted in his office of the county administrator in the governmental center in Leonardtown, Maryland. The interviewer is Carol Locke Endy. To begin, would you give us your full name and the year and the place you were born?
Yeah, George Gaither Forrest. I was born 1938 in Leonardtown, Maryland.
We agreed that this interview would focus on the chapter of your exceptionally interesting life that has to do with leaving and then coming home again to the county. But perhaps before that, a little context would help. So tell me about your people.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to start. I am one of these, and my family is one of these families that I think God has chosen as the ones that he's going to smile on, because both my parents are still alive. My father is 92. My mother is 86. And they live in the house that I was born in. In fact, midwife helped my mother deliver my oldest brother and me in that very same house. They have modified the house a bit. It was a 4-room house. It's now 8, maybe 9 rooms. And I think one of the beauties of having them still alive is that I get to see them every day. And that's a double-edged sword. It can be a good thing, and then it can be a challenging thing, because my mother says to me in the mornings when I leave the house, I don't want you to go to work and mess up, which kind of gives me the feeling that she still thinks that I'm a little boy, although I'm 65 years old. And but that's my mother's way of showing her affection. I guess a good start point is, since we're going to talk about my leaving and coming back, is I graduated from Banneker High School, which was a consolidated grades 1 through 12. The school is still there, but it is an elementary school now. It was the African-American high school in the northern part of the county. There were 3 high schools, one in the southern part of the county, and it was called Jarvisville, and then there was a Catholic school at Cardinal Gibbons, and of course Banneker. That educational experience for me was probably the beginning of what marked at least where I was going to go, or at least created in me this desire to want to go further and do more. When I graduated from high school, I said to my parents, I need to get out of Leonardtown, because in those days Leonardtown was a separate but equal community. And I'll tell you, separate but not necessarily equal. Although it was a fun place to grow up. I had an awful lot of fun when I grew up. High school was probably like most high schools. We had our athletic teams. We had all the things that everybody else had. And we had excellent teachers. My principal was a guy named Richard Ryken. And he had a PhD. And he was a Phi Beta Kappa. And in 1956, I didn't know what a PhD was and had no concept of what Phi Beta Kappa meant. But he forced us to take language classes, physics classes, all the kinds of things that were designed to get you ready to go to college. Well, there are 5 siblings, five children in my family. I have an older brother. I'm the second of 5 children. My oldest brother was, I guess I can say he's probably the perfect child. He was a good athlete, a good student, has my father's name. So a lot of my misbehaving is probably because I needed the attention that I thought my older brother got. And I think it's a second child syndrome that, whether real or imagined, I thought it was there. But at any rate, in 1956, after graduation, I had no idea that I was going to go off to college until August, when I decided that I really didn't want to work in tobacco anymore, and I needed to do something, and I needed to get away from Leonardtown. I didn't really think that my father was doing enough to have an impact on the way we were treated in the county. And I guess that was because in the 50s it was the beginning of the, I guess you can call it the African American Revolution or the reawakening of African Americans. It was the 50s and 60s that organizations like Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, the Black Panthers, all those were part of my college experience. We did sit-ins and marches, and I can remember in college we integrated or sat in at a restaurant north of Morgan. I went to college in Baltimore at Morgan State University, and there was a restaurant there called Reed's Drugstore, and we sat in there with under the threat of not only being arrested but being expelled from school, because the president of the college thought that this was not what young, bright, educated African Americans should be doing. We shouldn't be rebel rousing and those kinds of things. So I went there and again majored in in political science. Ended up taking ROTC because Morgan is a land-grant college, and land-grant colleges in those days required all male students to take at least 2 years of ROTC. The ROTC program at Morgan was an Army ROTC program. I had no intention of going into the military. In fact, my goals were to finish Morgan, go to law school, and then become the greatest civil rights lawyer that ever lived, none of which happened because I didn't work hard enough in college to get to that point. But anyway, I did take ROTC and then had the good fortune of getting into the advanced program, which meant that at the end of the 4 years you were commissioned second lieutenant, and had that experience, went off, spent 23 years in the military. And I'm going a long way to get here about how I ended up getting back home, but spent 23 years in the military and then retired from the military, worked a year in Saudi Arabia, and then a friend of mine was the athletic director at Morgan State and said, our football program is in disarray. We need somebody to come back and work on retention and academic performance of the athletes. So I ended up going back to Morgan, coached football there, and taught some classes in the history department for almost 9 years. And then my friend lost his job. And when he lost his job, the life of a coach, the reality of coaching set in, and I got fired. And retreated to the safest place that I know, which is home. And when I came back to the county, the first opportunity I had was to work at Ryken High School, which is a Catholic school. I went there and interviewed for the coaching position, but when I got there, the president of the school said, we just lost our dean of students, and it would really, we think that you could do the job. So I applied, got it, stayed there 3 years. And in that process, I really found out how important my father really was and what my father really had done. Because those 23 years that I was gone, my father continued to do amazing things. He was the first African-American school board president. He worked his way with Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company from a simple line foreman to a first line supervisor, and then left that job and ended up working with the court system for up until last year. So he'd done an awful lot. He had done an awful lot, and I didn't really have an appreciation, because when I left in '56, I was young, hot-headed, ready to raise my fists in defiance and down with the man and wear dashikis and afros and get in touch with the revolution. And my parents were, my father in his own very quiet way was making some substantial changes in the way, in life in St. Mary's County. I remember an interesting story. I was stationed at Fort Myer, which is right outside of Washington, in 1964. And I think that was 64, because that was the March on Washington, Martin Luther King March on Washington. And the unit I was assigned to was the 3rd U.S. Infantry, the Presidential Honor Guard, but they also had an additional duty of riot control, which meant they were the troops that would be sent into Washington in the event that there would be a civil disturbance. So I think the march was in August, and my date may be off a bit. But my parents called me and said, we're going to be up in Washington in August for this march that's being orchestrated and run by this young African-American Reverend Martin Luther King. And they called me, and after I got that call, we went to a briefing, and the briefing was that you guys will be prepared to go into the city to do riot control in the event that there is some whatever. And I'm going, oh my God, I have to make a decision here. If I do go into this, what happens if I see my parents there or somebody that I know? Because I think there were busloads of people from St. Mary's. Fortunately, nothing happened, and we weren't committed. But those were the kinds of things and the kinds of participation and activity that my father did that really helped me realize what an important person he was and how influential he was in changing some things. In fact, he was key in getting John Lancaster elected. I think my father was his campaign chairman when he ran, and John Lancaster is or was, and John's still alive and healthy and vibrant and challenging and one of my mentors. But he was the first African-American county commissioner and served for 2 terms, I believe. Let me see. And so when I got back to Ryken, I had the opportunity to really spend some quality time with my parents, because again, the whole time that I was away, we would come for the summer, and I would bring my kids, and the kids would come and spend time with Grandma and Grandpa, and but never really had an opportunity to sit and talk about my father's philosophy and whether, because when I was growing up, he worked an awful lot. He worked awfully hard, so we didn't see him a lot. He wasn't. My mother is probably. We talk about my father a lot, but my mother is really the matriarch who held the whole thing together while he was out chasing lots of his dreams. And lots of his dreams were delayed because he had children and lots of children, and so he didn't accomplish. We thought he didn't accomplish all of the things that he really did, but he's very content in what he's done, and he's been recognized and lots of those kinds of things. So my coming home really was a godsend, because I believe that in my heart of hearts, and this may sound melodramatic, but I think that the 3 years of combat in Vietnam, I think God allowed me to survive so that I could come home and really appreciate and find out who my father was. Because when I left home, I really didn't have a high impression. I didn't hold him in high regard. Number one, he was, I thought, and I think the term, I've never said this, and I would never say this to him, but I thought my father was really an Uncle Tom, because he survived, and that's probably what you needed to be able to do. And in a lot of ways, my mother tells me that I'm an awful lot like him, and I hope that my children don't see that as being an Uncle Tom, but also see it as developing these survival mechanisms that will allow you to exist in a society that is that still has a long way to go in terms of recognizing people for their human quality. And I guess that's a long way around to how I got back.
George, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the way you perceived the racial issues in the county as a kid, as a teenager when you went away, and the extent to which your family talked about it. What you obviously learned things at home about black and white, and you developed considerable anger to make you not only want to leave St. Mary's County, but to join the revolution. And so I'm interested in the kind of the growing up learning about race that you had. You obviously had another kind of learning while you were in the service. when you came back here, some things have changed, and I wonder how much of the change is in you and how much of it is in the situation.
Yeah, let me. I think the discussion of race at home when I was growing up, it was not a conscious discussion. It was kind of a matter of fact. It was more about these are the kinds of things that you need to have in order to be able to stay out of trouble. Because there was not a lot of race mixing, we didn't encounter, I personally didn't encounter a lot, direct discrimination. I mean, nobody ever said to me that you can't go to this fountain or whatever, because we didn't have the separate fountains or whatever, but we did have separate facilities. I remember a couple of things that stick out in my mind is there's a theater in Leonardtown. It's still there. It's called Nook and Monks. At that time, it was called the New Theater because Leonardtown was a bustling little metropolis, and it had 2 movies. But the entrance for the African Americans, colored people, Negroes, whatever we were called at that time, was the back way. And I used to think that either they believed we were awfully stupid or we were so afraid that we wouldn't challenge the system. There was never a person on that door to collect money. We were expected to go there, stand and wait, and when the ticket collector from the front thought that there were enough people there, he would come and collect your money. Well, my brothers were all very obedient and would do that, and I would go in and go upstairs and take my seat, and then if the guy came up and wanted to collect my money, I'd pay him, but I wouldn't stay there. And I know that once I did that, we got home, and my mother was absolutely horrified that I would do something like that that would cause some problems, because she was always concerned about boys and what would happen to us if we got in that kind of trouble. I think the thing that probably really cemented my wanting to get out of here is a very important part of my parents' life, and still is, and a very important part of this community is its religious fervor. Good Catholic community, and I am in no way slamming the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church failed African Americans miserably, particularly in my growing up. I remember once we had a new priest, a new, young, energetic priest who wanted to bring diversity to the county. And so he asked my mother if it were possible for me to study to be an acolyte. And like all boys, at that point, all of us wanted to be priests until we found that there were girls and there were more important things than being priests. And so he taught me the rituals of the Mass and how to serve, and learned Latin and did all those kinds of things. And on graduation, he said, once you finish, we'll have you do Mass at the big church, which is St. Aloysius. Well, the good parishioners of the county, first of all, I guess they believed that he couldn't get me to learn all of this stuff to be able to do it, because this was something that only bright young white children could do. But I learned it all. I did all the stuff and passed all the tests. But on that Sunday that I was supposed to serve, the head pastor told him that it would cause too much trouble and I would not be allowed to serve. I could serve in the chapel in the priest's resident. I told him I didn't want to do that. My mother said, you have to do this. This is God's will, whatever. And so I did. And it was from that point that I started to think about, who is this God? And why is he doing this to me? I think I've done all the things that I'm supposed to do. And so it kind of challenged my thought process. And then I really started to think about religion and what religion meant, one of the first questions in the Baltimore Catechism is, "Who are you?" And every Catholic child knows the response is, "I am a child of God, created in His image and likeness," and that's a pat answer. And then I used to start to look around the church and try to figure out, where is this image that looks like me or my parents or anybody? The other thing that used to really bother me, and it bothered us an awful lot as we got older, is when they did communion on Sundays, the white people went first. And we would have to wait. And I remember this woman who, and my parents know her well because I think my mother had a confrontation with her, who was late for church, and communion had started, and we were all in line, and she came from the back of the line and forced her way into the front, and nobody said anything. And this was when I started to think, well, what are my parents doing? Why are they putting up with this kind of nonsense? And then I really kind of drifted away from the concept of Catholicism and what it really means, because the church really wasn't doing. I mean, maybe they were and we just didn't know about it, but I don't ever remember priests coming to our house. I don't remember any of the kind of religious exchange that I see going on now. And then I got to college, and I think college too was a defining, because we had a Catholic club in college, which was called the Newman Club, and our advisor was a military chaplain, and he'd been in the Marine Corps, and he started to talk to us about defining the deity and what the deity really was, and to talk more about spirituality than religious stuff. I mean, the pomp and circumstance of the church is wonderful and whatever, but the spiritual, minus the spiritual piece, it's really empty and really hollow. And I just, and it, you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. I now sit back as an old man and think about some of the symbolism or the lack of symbolism in the church. I mean, the welcoming people to God's house and then doing the whole ceremony with your back to them, I mean, is just wow. And to have the notion of, I would want to participate in a ceremony where you're receiving the body and blood of Christ, and you're so afraid that, because there are rules like, if you let this host touch your teeth, if you touch it with your hands, if it falls on the floor, all of those kind of religious fear kinds of things that were used as control mechanisms. And again, as a young man, I didn't realize that, but I do know now that that's probably what it was really all about, because the more we know about it, the more we're going to question. I remember the sisters used to tell us, don't ask those kinds of questions. And I'm going, but my teachers in school are telling me to be inquisitive and ask questions and challenge and probe and try to find out and research. And then when you say to the nuns, how could Mary possibly have had a baby when biologically you're telling me that this is what it takes to make that happen? And the sister's constant response was always, it is about faith. It is always about faith. And when all else fails, reach back and grab your faith. Well, if your faith is really shaky from the start, how do you reach back and grab it? But I think I think the changes in Leonardtown have been, coming back and seeing them, the changes have been an awful lot cosmetic change, but there has been some real human change, because I know that just in my family, and I'll use my family as an example. My mother is really race conscious, and because of I think the amount of scarring that she had growing up and what she saw happen to my father, she's still really not comfortable around white people. And she's very guarded around white people. But I think as she gets older and as she changes and her grandchildren change and her great grandchildren change and one of her grandsons is in a interracial marriage, and she has grandchildren who are memorialized or monument or whatever in this office because they are wonderful children, and she sees them. Because my mother often refers to white people as the others. You know? And we laugh because I know when my youngest son got married, and the first question she asked was, is he marrying one of the others? Because she had met Lisa before Chris and Lisa decided to marry. And I said, Mother, yeah. And she said, well, that's not going to work. That is just not going to work. And so it was strained for a long time. And then when Alex and Jessica came along, I mean, Lisa is just like all the other kids. And I think you've heard me talk about this before. I think that was the fear surrounding desegregation. I don't think it had anything to do with schools and water fountains and separate places to eat and all those kinds of things. I think that was all on the surface. The real difficulty, and again, the reason they fought so hard against school desegregation is if I sit next to you every day, the fear about what you are and what you are not is going to go away because you'll either like me or dislike me because what I do to you personally, not what I look like. And we're seeing that all the time. I mean, it's just the more you are exposed to other people, the better you understand who they are and what they're all about. And you will realize that all of us want basically the same thing. Peaceful life, the best for our children, safe, secure, those kinds of things. And I think the architects of segregation understood that. They understood that better than those of us who were pushing to get it, because we thought that it was about something different. It was about, they don't want to share the water with us. Well, I mean, that doesn't hold a lot of credence, because even in slavery days they drank out of the same glasses, the same whatever. It was about this mixing, and it was about this elimination of a race. And I guess if I were in a position of the chosen race or the privileged class, I would be intimidated too. And the way I attack this intimidation is eliminate, change the person or the entity that can make that happen, and that is the African American male. Whatever, I mean, if there, we smile now. If there is an interracial marriage, the children, I mean, it's finished. They may have green eyes, blue eyes, whatever, but they won't have blonde hair, and they'll be high yellow, but they won't be recognizable. And I think the power source in this country understands that, and it is a fear, and it's the realization that the European ancestral folks will no longer be the dominant race. I mean, all you have to do is go to Florida or Los Angeles, and you will see the browning of America is not coming from east to west, it's from the south. And I think I think to fear that is short-sighted. Lots of decisions around this country have been short-sighted that have caused us some great pain because we're still trying to preserve that peace. And there have been some really far-reaching visionaries who said we need to make some change. One of my heroes is Harry Truman. And Harry Truman is a hero because he realized that, number one, I cannot afford to have a military fighting force that's separate and equal. Because when the bad guys start to shoot, they don't care what you look like, what your political persuasions are. They just want to make sure that you're a big enough target for them to hit. And he realized that immediately. And I think that the military, and I am really prejudiced about the military because it is the social institution that has been in the forefront of really changing this country in a lot of good ways and in a lot of negative ways, because at some point we have leadership, military leadership, who believe that the only solution is to go kill the other guys, and so diplomacy is not part of their charter. But in terms of social change, in terms of scientific change, in terms of medical change, lots of the medical stuff that we do now of using airplanes to or helicopters to medevac. I mean, it's routine at this hospital. I mean, and that's a military concept. I mean, the whole notion of computers. I mean, the military had these humongous machines that were doing all of their computer work, and the result of that, we have these PCs now on everybody's desk. So in areas of communications, lots. But again, in the social arena, the military has been their ability to be able to mandate, to legislate change, and in an organization like that, you can do it. In a democracy like we have, to legislate it doesn't work all of the time as well as we would like it to do, because I think the change will come through socialization. My father will often say, if I invite you to my dinner table, then the social exchange that's going to go on there will be real. And I think the whole notion of salt and pepper doing a breaking of the bread kind of thing was designed around that concept, because you can't get mad with me when you're eating. Impossible. You may want to go sit by yourself, but it's probably not going to happen. And so there is the social mixing that I think is really important. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done. I use this organization that I'm in. We pay a lot of lip service to diversity, but there are segments of the society that are excluded from what we do. I mean, in this county, in the next 5 years, 1 in 5 citizens will be over 65 years old. And we talk about, and me too, and we talk about affordable, diverse housing, and we don't bring that group to the table to talk about it. I mean, we see this proliferation of apartment buildings that are 3 stories. The more stairs you put, the older you get, the less number of stairs should be in your house. So we ought to be looking at communities and housing pieces that are designed to accommodate 1/5 of your population. I mean, Cedar Lane is a wonderful place. Too many stairs. Too tall, too high rise. My parents, I'll tell you, my parents would rather stay in their house and struggle with the steps in their house than move out and move into an apartment kind of collective box. There's I think the Germans experimented with putting people in these. They were the first ones to start experimenting with putting people in these boxes, these controlled communities or whatever, and we're doing basically the same thing. So diversity in the county is something that we pay lip service to, but we really need to focus on it. We have a workforce of probably 750, maybe a few more. In the management ranks, there are 3 managers. One is a director, and she has a double whammy on her. She's a woman, she's young, and she's African American, and the lowest paid of all of the directors. So we have to work on that. We have another guy who is the director of Marcy House. He's not a director, but a division, and does a super job. But both of these agencies have to raise their own money, because the perception is they're the softer side of government, and these guys they don't have the ability to do the hard stuff like planning and zoning and public works and finance. And I have to remind people, they have a pretty good business department at Morgan and Howard and whatever, so these guys aren't going to come out and not know what it is that they're doing. So part of my challenge, if I have the opportunity to be the county administrator, is to figure out ways to make that at least a little more balanced. Am I going to change it? Maybe 1-2 people at a time. And I think my father tells me all the time, that's how you make change, is one person at a time. And that then has some kind of ripple effect. I think my mother tells me all the time I have difficulty holding a job since I've been back in the county, because I've had at least 5-6 jobs since I came home. But every time I do, I always go back to probably the one that probably changed me most, other than the military, is my experience as a principal of a high school. Because young people, as they say in their vernacular, they keep it real, and they will tell you what's on your mind. If they don't like you, they'll tell you why they don't like you. And if you listen to them, they'll help you solve most of the problems around them. But you just have to be willing to listen and include them in the process. And I use that same management style that I use with my kids, that I used in the high school. I also use it here. I tell these guys, directors particularly, if you want the workers, the guys down in the weeds, to really work hard, you make it their program. You let them help establish what the rules are, how we're going to implement the rules, and then they will be responsible. But if you use your role as a benevolent dictator and lay it over them, they'll do it, but not with a lot of zeal. So, okay.
What happened to the revolution? And I guess that question is perhaps national, but also local. Was there one? And the contrast that you saw at age 18 between your father's way of one at a time and being able to survive by being flexible versus the young man's way of the revolution. Have you become your father, as your mother thinks? And does that always happen to the revolutionary? And is there a revolution for the younger generation that needs to happen now in relation to race?
Yeah, I think most revolutionaries get co-opted. I think I am my father. I think rather than kicking down the door now, what I try to do is convince people that they should open it. But the objectives are the same, and that is to get inside. Now, if you do it my father's way and you get inside, the logical thought is that you would be more accepted, as opposed to, because if I kick it in, then I'm forcing my way in and I'm forcing my way to the table. Sometimes that has to happen too. I think that what happened, at least in my little narrow part of the world, is the revolution lost its steam because the revolutionaries got what they thought they really needed, and it was more material stuff. It was, give me the opportunity to do this, and that's not the case with everybody, because there are lots of guys who are still doing a tremendous amount of things. I remember once having a discussion with a young man about, and this was when I was at college, and when I was teaching at college, about revolution and what you needed to do and how you needed to make the contribution. And he said, the first thing I got to do is I got to survive. I got to get a job so I can eat and feed my family and whatever. And I can go out and be the revolutionary and then watch my counterparts with their BMW and their Lexus and whatever. And I don't necessarily want to struggle. So is a revolution for young people? Absolutely. But I think it's more of a moral revolution than how we how we change our physical environment, because Leonardtown has really changed. I mean, we have Chez Dukes, the Cafe des Artistes. We affectionately call it Chez Dukes because it used to be Duke's Restaurant and Bar and Grill or whatever, and we just threw the fan. But again, that's changed. But has Leonardtown really changed? Probably not. I mean, we still have Leonard Freehold. There is still this underclass. The majority of the underclass are African American. There is still a hesitancy to accept people for who they are. I mean, we are still really quick to categorize and put people in boxes. It's sometimes humorous sitting in this office. And if I am out in the front office doing something, the notion is that everybody else out there has an important role, and I'm not confused with the custodial guy because I have on a tie, but if I didn't have a tie, they would probably think I was maintenance. And then there are people who come to the county, local people who come in and are amazed that you can do things. It's like, I didn't know you could do that. Well, my job is to do that. My job is to make that happen. I have the training, I have the experience, I have the know-how to make it happen. Because I don't look like you think a county administrator should look, doesn't negate the fact that I can do the job. I remember once we were, and this was back to my military days. We were part of this unit that I was in was a ceremonial unit, and they traveled around the country doing patriotic shows. And we were in Columbia, South Carolina, and I was the commander of this organization. And we went to the hotel, and I had a driver. Not that that meant anything. All colonels have drivers. It's not a big thing. It's more of a function of the organization as opposed to status. But we went to this hotel, and I went up to the desk to start the conversation about getting the room, and my driver, who happened to be white and was an enlisted man, the hotel guy looked past me to the driver and said, are you in charge, and do you want, what are we attempting to do? And the kid was totally embarrassed because he's going, that's the colonel. He didn't see what the guy behind the desk did. And I had some choices. I could be very angry and rant and rave and whatever, and I just basically said, well, he's specialist, and the way you can tell in the future of the rank structure is enlisted people have their rank on their sleeves, commissioned officers wear their rank on their lapels. So it doesn't matter what the rank is, just the first thing you do, if you see stripes, you know that is a non-commissioned officer or an enlisted person, and if you see something on their epaulette, then And that's how you figure that out. So you won't have this difficulty again, because there are guys who will come in here and tear this place apart in terms of not, because with that attitude, we could have said, okay, I'm going to take all 500 of these guys, and we're not going to stay at this hotel. We're going to go across the street because you have personally embarrassed me. But you take those opportunities and you use them to try to teach lessons. I don't know what kind of an impact it had on the guy, but it was. These are the kind of situations. And I think my fear, though, and when we talk about revolution, and is there a revolution for young people, is particularly for young African Americans, I don't think they're ready. I don't think they are prepared, because they don't have an understanding of what society really is all about. What we've done is we've resegregated ourselves. And so the rejection of anything that is non-ethnic, at least your ethnicity, you reject. Well, that's okay if you have a viable alternative that you can relate to or go to, but math is math is math, and English is English is English, right? And you can probably try to create a substitute, and that's okay, and it works some of the time, but the universality of that doesn't happen. So when you are thrust in positions of responsibility and positions of leadership, or when you kick the door open and you step inside and you're asked, what did you bring to the table? And you can't articulate that. You can't communicate that. All you've done is kick the door in. You haven't, you're not going to have an impact. So I worry an awful lot about how maybe my generation or the generation after failed to tell these guys, yes, it's okay to have a revolution, and you need to do a revolution, but you also need, and most good revolutionaries understand the bad guy, and they don't totally reject him. What they try to do is learn as much as they can about the bad guy, so that when they have the opportunity, they can overthrow him. But you can't overthrow folks, and you can't change systems if you don't know what the system is. I mean, how do you change government if you don't vote? And you don't vote because you don't understand the Constitution, what the Constitution says, because it was written by a white guy, and you're mad because Thomas Jefferson had an affair with Sally Hemings. That's okay. I mean, he did that. You can't change that or whatever. But the words in that document mean more to you than the relationship that he had with his woman. And you need to understand that. And you need to know what your rights are and how you can impact the system to make that change. And I don't think that, I used to tell my young guys that I used to work with all the problem, you know, what makes me sad about you guys is you're one-dimensional. You're one-dimensional people. You only know one music, you only know one language, you only know one style of dress, you only know one thing, and that's your own individual ethnicity. And lots of folks died, struggled, suffered, whatever, so that you could bridge that gap. And we went back, which is fine for the system, because the system says, we don't have to worry about these guys. They've already rendered themselves harmless because they don't understand the system. How do you change the monetary system if you don't understand at least the basic principles of economics? Is economics white? Maybe, but I would venture to say that in Timbuktu, they had an economic system that worked, and worked pretty well, but for some reason we kind of reject that. So it's going to be really hard for the younger generation, particularly African Americans, to make a change unless we make some quantum leaps forward about how we get prepared. And there are lots of good kids. I mean, some of the things that cause me alarm, though, is I've been to 4 graduations in the last 5 days. And I'm sitting there while everybody else is maybe not everybody, but as folks are focusing on the pomp and circumstance and whatever, I'm looking to see how many guys have National Honor Society regalia. 2 at Great Mills, 1 at Chaptacon, none at Ryken, and I can't remember the number at Leonardtown. That's frightening. So what that means is they're either not in the AP courses, they're not doing the kind of work, or they are doing like my nephew, who chose a conscious choice not to be a good student because of the rejection that he would have. Why do you want to be in that old honor society? Well, you want to be in the honor society so that if by chance the opportunity to go to Yale is presented, you can do it. And you don't limit yourself by saying, well, I don't want to do that. And then you wake up one day and all that's left is, God, maybe the only place that I can, and not that I mean, the College of Southern Maryland is a wonderful organization that serves them. But again, there is so much more. But you have to get ready to do it. I mean, and I don't know how to do that. If and when I leave this job, I would really like to go back into working with young guys, because they are what will fuel the revolution. And I have, again, I said at the top of this, my family is blessed. I have a grandnephew, and Quentin is 5 going on 65, because his mother is a teacher, his grandmother's a teacher, his uncles are teachers. He hears, in addition to all the fun we have, he also hears intellectual conversations about lots of things. He's exposed to lots. Just as an example, the other day, I went home for lunch and he was there, and he had a shirt on that had a spider on it. And I said, Quentin, good looking spider there, nice insect. And he said, wrong, Uncle Hans. Spider is not an insect. It's an arachna whatever. And I said, well, what is the difference between an insect and a spider? An insect has 6 legs. Spider has 8 legs. Insect has 3 parts to his body. Spider is a 1 part. And this is a 5-year-old kid? So you tell me that he can't learn? Yes, he can, if you give him the right kind of stuff. So that's what needs to happen. We need to have, and I hope that between now and the time, and it won't, between now and the time that Quentin gets to high school, he won't lose that spark. I mean, he's a reader. His grandmother reads to him. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think we're missing, and then it all just kind of tails back to the family piece and how important all of that is, and how we've got to convince them. And my role to these young guys is to try to convince them that you're too young to be trying to raise children. You don't have a clue of what it's really all about. So you need to wait until you get prepared. You're able to provide not only the material things for them, but the mental kind of growth, the mental kind of strength that they're going to need to survive. I think that most of the young African-American boys who get in trouble have a good mental toughness, but it's not intellectually based. It is, I just need to be masculine and brute force. And I mean, it's okay to be strong and whatever, but if you temper that with some, as the ladies out in my office tell me, the feminine side of your being is really important, and I think we miss that an awful lot. So, yeah, there is a revolution. There needs to be a revolution. There needs to be a moral revolution. I mean, fiscal kind of the changing the environment. Yeah, so I can eat wherever I want to eat, but if I can't afford to go there, what difference does it make if the restaurants are desegregated? What difference does it make if the schools are integrated, and at a PTA meeting I look around and you're not there, and I need to talk to you about your children and whatever. So all the gains that I think we've made have been, we just have to rekindle that in young people. And I know that I have nieces and nephews who will do that, but at the broader population, it needs to happen on both sides. Yeah.
Which was what Martin Luther King was about in the last chapter before he was assassinated. George, how do you keep on keeping on when you have to absorb so much of the racial attitudes that haven't really changed, but you have the willingness yourself to continue trying to make change? It takes a toll someplace. And your father clearly figured out how to live with it because he's 90 plus now. But we often say that African American men suffer health problems at a great disproportion, and that perhaps it is rooted in what they absorb from society.
And you're right. I think I'm on the plus side of the statistic, because I think the average age for African Americans, like males, 55, 56, somewhere in that time frame. So I'm 10 years over. I'm probably using somebody else's 10 years. But I think a lot of it has to do with what's important in your life. And I tell these folks around here all the time, probably what helped me define what's important in life is having been in combat. And realizing that the decisions that you make in combat will have a devastating effect on somebody if you don't make the right decision. So anything that I do here is easy. The kind of stress that's put on with the lack of diversity or diversity climate, I choose not to let it be that big of a burden, because I have a refuge. And that refuge is when at 12 o'clock, if it gets really squirrely in here, I just go home and my mother has lunch, and I sit and listen to my father talk about in the good old days when it was really tough, and you guys don't know tough. And then I have some really good friends in the community. I mean, and guys like Sam Walker and Mike Whitson, and there's a whole host of guys and Ernie Bell and those guys. And Ernie Bell and I are about the same age, and we grew up in two different societies. I mean, his parents lived in Leonardtown, and he didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was, but we have a common bond. Ernie Bell's bond and my bond, and we were both in the military, so he understands what it takes, what it took, what he had to do, what I had to endure, and it was no different. So we had that common purpose. Sam Walker, who is probably one of God's true saints. I think if God ever decided, if God ever said, this is what I think a minister should be, or a pastor should be, he picked Sam Walker, and it will be a loss to this community because he's going to go back and take that to North Carolina. But it's those kind of folks. There are other people in the community who just make you want to do better because they don't expect you to do anything. My father and the principal at our high school used to tell us all the time, you have to be twice as good, twice as smart, lucky as hell, and pray an awful lot, because nobody expects you to do anything. I mean, it's like this job. And people are even bold enough to make those kinds of statements. When I went from here over to planning and zoning, one of the commissioners, and I won't name him, said, we have no expectations from him. All we want him to do is hold the organization together. If this were the marching orders of anybody else, it would have probably been, okay, that's a license to steal. They don't expect me to do anything, so why should I do anything? But my mindset won't allow me to do that, and so I went over there with a hell-bent on, when I leave this place, it's going to be better than it was when I got here. And I think that's what strengthens us. And again, I keep going back to, I'm not a very religious person, but I am a spiritual person. And I really believe that God, in his own way, he or she, puts you in situations to make a difference, to make a change. And he gives you choices. The choices can be, I could very easily say, I am oppressed, I am downtrodden, I am all those kinds of things. I could use that as an excuse, but you know what? People don't want to hear that. People don't care about how much you suffer as an African American. That doesn't mean to the general public. It doesn't mean anything. Most people see me and say, "You have a good life. What are you complaining about? Why are you worried about equity and ethnicity? I mean, you have a wonderful life. Look at you." And what they don't realize is that every single day that I come to work, I have to pay attention to small things that the normal guy would not have to pay attention to. And I guess the other thing that I keep going back to is, I am amazed that people are amazed that I can do what I do. And I go, but a guy who goes to college, a guy who finishes college, a guy who has a master's degree, a guy who successfully completed a military career, a guy who principaled a high school, a guy who ran a student folks or whatever, a guy who worked in the defense industry, a guy who came to county government, should be expected to do something. I would be disappointed if I couldn't do it. And so should you. But you shouldn't be surprised. And my bosses are surprised that I can do this. And the patronization is the other piece of it. I mean, it is like, you know, you did a hell of a job on that today. You must have did some reading. Well, why would I come before you if I hadn't read the paperwork? I mean, why do you think they put this on my desk? And you hear that often. I mean, and as I said, you could take, you have some choices. You could take. I think I was talking about that. I am often surprised that people believe that you have the capabilities that you have, and again, I draw a lot of my strength and the source of a lot of my humor from my parents. And my mother says to me all the time, "We didn't send you to Morgan for nothing." And we invested our money wisely or whatever. So, but I think part of my responsibility, and when I'll go back to revolution, part of my responsibility to cause change to happen is to convince people, or to change the stereotype that we are a multi-talented, a multifaceted people, and that we appreciate the same kinds of things that everybody else does, and we want the same things for our children. And I always try to look at people and try to find some common thing that we can expand on. I have a really good friend who is from the West Coast and happens to be of the Jewish faith. And we often compare our growing up, thinking that there were going to be lots of differences. I mean, the physical differences are very obvious. But beyond that, her mother believed the same kinds of things that my mother did. As an example, once the bed is made in the morning, you never go back unless you're sick. You don't wear your hat in the house. everybody sits down to eat. Nobody stands up and does that. And it's just little things. We used to talk about when we would go on summer vacations when my father was, and again, we were fortunate because my father used to take us out of the county on summer vacations, even if it was to go to Washington. I remember the first time we went to New York, I guess I was 10. Amazing. But the same kind of behavior in the car that they did in California, we did back here. The same kinds of rules about what you do when you meet people, and the same kind of behavior in their community as in ours. I mean, I lived in a community where my mother's sister lived next door. Her youngest sister lived across the street. I had an uncle that was 2 houses down. So it was community raising. And hers was the same. I mean, her father's brother was a pharmacist. Her father was a pharmacist. Her father's brother was a pharmacist. They all lived in the same neighborhood, and the expectations of these children were all the same. So the commonness, even though we were coast apart and different religious backgrounds, but basically the same. And I think that's one of the keys to why this nation has been able to survive, is although we are very different, we all have some basic common stuff that we all want to get done. And I worry about the divisiveness of pulling us apart by trying to make us more different. I think ethnicity is a wonderful thing, but it needs to be an inclusive. Yeah, you need to know that I'm different and whatever, but the purpose is the purpose is the same. My boss is here. The new boss's mantra is communications and common purpose. And we have to market that, what that looks like. But I guess it is, I guess to wrap this up, I am a blessed person. I think I have been extremely fortunate. I think that my deity, whoever he or she is, smiles on me all the time. Because no matter which direction I go, they always seem to be there to get me turned to exactly where I need to be. But I think that all goes back to having this really firm base of behavior that was instilled in me a long, long time ago. And I tell my sons all the time, we tried to do basically the same thing. I'm not sure that they listened all the time, because I didn't listen to my parents all the time, but it's important to have it because you can come back to it. And it's the same as here. I say to people, process is your friend. If you have a process and you adhere to that process, you'll never get lost. And if you have a set of standards growing up, you can never get lost. What I find with a lot of youngsters today is they don't have that baseline of behavior. I guess a good analogy is it's like a boat. There is a beam that runs down the middle of the boat that keeps it righted. And unless a storm gets really bad, it can lift to the left or to the right or whatever, but it will always come back to center. But if you don't have that, if you believe that there is no norm with behavior, with language, with lack of participation, you don't know where to go. And so if you stray over to the left or to the right, you'll continue to go because you can't get back. You don't know how to get back. Every single child, there are no bad children. Every single child is a good child. We just haven't given them the right kind of stuff to make good, smart decisions. And I think that's the philosophy that if we talk about a revolution, that's the kind of philosophy that I think will make the next revolution or the coming revolution works. But you can't have a revolution that's all over and has no real purpose. And where do we want to be when the whole thing ends up? And if I have any regret about my life, and I don't really have any. I think that the biggest regret that I have is I probably could have spent and should have spent more time with my family, because I think families are the stuff that helps you grow. It helps get you through. And I mean my immediate family, my sons and and their involvement and exposure to my father, because they need now more than anything to be around him and be with him, and they do. They come an awful lot, and they just and I know he loves it. They kind of just sit and listen to, and he's becoming more open than he used to be. One time, my father was very closed, very personal, um, uh, withdrawn inside. I mean, a lot of the stories that I'm now finding out or hearing about never talked about because it's probably too painful. And I think I can relate because it's like being a veteran of war. You don't until you move a long, long, long ways away from it. I don't know whether you saw the article in the Enterprise on Memorial Day where I talked about I have just started to be able to talk about those kind of experiences because they were extremely painful. Painful so to the point that I know that I don't want my grandchildren or anybody else's grandchildren to have to go through that horror. And my last comment, I think that the not that soldiers are the answer to everything, not that the military is the answer to everything, but I think the lack of military involvement in the highest levels of government has caused us to make some really bad. I mean, we should never, at least in my mind, have been anywhere near Baghdad. Never. And I think that had there been more involvement in Congress by former military guys, we probably wouldn't have gotten there. We wouldn't have gotten there. And now we're backpedaling, trying to we're trying to rationalize what we already did. And it's scary because the opposition, they're not sending out strong opposition. And this guy landing on the deck of an aircraft carrier does not make him a great man. No, it doesn't make him a great. And again, I worry about that, and I worry about it locally too. We're just not. Whatever. But so much for my political. Whatever. Good.
Thank you very much, George. This is wonderful.
Good.